Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Scarlett Johansson leads an expedition into a dinosaur-dominated island in Jurassic World Rebirth. Mercenary Zora Bennett, played by Scarlett Johansson, is hired by pharmaceutical executive Martin Krez, played by Rupert Friend, to lead a team on a secret mission to the Isle of St. Hubert, one of the last places where dinosaurs still thrive, and a former InGen test site, to get 3 samples of rare dino DNA that could cure heart disease. Recruiting Duncan Kincaid, played by Mahershala Ali, to lead the team, and paleontologist Dr. Henry Loomis, played by Jonathan Bailey, on their way there, they rescue the shipwrecked Delgado family, Manuel Garcia Ruffalo's Ruben, Luna Blazy's Teresa, her boyfriend Xavier, played by David Iacono, and Audrina Miranda's Isabella. But when the mission goes wrong, it becomes a struggle to get the samples and escape with their lives. How hard is it to make a good sequel to Jurassic Park? That's the question we probably all asked ourselves for the best part of 30 years of lesser follow-ups. But the fact of the matter is, it's hard because you're never going to match the impact of Jurassic Park in its day. It wasn't just a movie, it was an event. It was a seismic shift in the way that blockbusters are made. When Sam Neill and company encountered the Brachiosaurus for the first time, and human actors interacted with realistic CGI dinosaurs seamlessly, it confirmed digital effects as an evolutionary leap for filmmaking. When Jeff Goldblum's Ian Malcolm exclaims, "You crazy son of a bitch, you did it," he could just as well be speaking for the audience about Spielberg pulling it off. Up until that point, dinosaurs were largely played by stop motion, which has its charms admittedly, but never quite looked realistic, especially with human actors in the frame. Seeing that first dinosaur was awesome, and things would never be the same again. And you can't put that genie back in the bowl. You can't recreate that first impact. And Jurassic Park helped usher in our current era of special effects blockbusters and countless creature features in its wake. Even Spielberg tried and failed to recapture the magic in The Lost World, which is usually listed as one of the weakest films he's ever directed. But the 2 sequels to Park didn't nearly miss the mark as much as the Jurassic World franchise did, when it made the series de-extinct in the same way as the dinosaurs themselves. And I think most of you watching this know just how I felt about those films. It wasn't just they were flagrantly stupid, like Chris Pratt no-selling a volcano in Fallen Kingdom, or whatever the hell that stuff about locusts was in Dominion. What made it worse was they were so smug and cynical about it as well. They tried going a bit meta about audiences not being wowed by special effects, so they constantly have characters going, "People aren't interested in dinosaurs anymore," which is just demonstrably not true, as seen by the fact these movies make $1 kajillion every time they make one of these, despite the last several mostly being one big pile of shit, to borrow a phrase from Dr. Malcolm. Now, I've long felt that Colin Trevorrow was the wrong man for the job, but he's out of the picture now. And Dominion was meant to be the last one, at least for a while, but obviously the negative feedback from that has meant that only 3 years later, we now have a soft relaunch in the form of Rebirth. Apparently Spielberg himself was quite heavily involved in the development of this one, and it does appear like Rebirth is a concerted effort to try and get the series back to basics and closer to the original film, particularly the fact they brought back David Koepp, who adapted the first 2 films and has had a pretty big year between this and his Steven Soderbergh double bill. Koepp apparently did some uncredited rewrites on Dominion, but he's the main writer here, and the influence of him and Spielberg can be felt on Rebirth, which, I've got to be honest here, feels like the closest to the original films that this franchise has done in a very long time. And I know my rants about these films are legendary at this point, but alas, we aren't getting one this time, because Rebirth is, in my opinion, the best out of any of the World films. Although, don't get me wrong, this is still a pretty flawed sequel, but at least it feels like a Jurassic Park movie. After the title card appears, there's some opening text that quickly recaps things, which could basically be paraphrased as, "Jurassic Park happened. and then a whole bunch of other stuff. It almost practically invites the audience to skip over the world films without totally retconning them. The world films set up dinosaurs roaming across the world, but almost instantly lost interest in that idea even within Dominion, and Rebirth opens with a world mostly back to normal. The dinosaurs have largely died off because they're ill-suited to the modern world and climate change, and those that have survived do so on warm, oxygen-rich islands near the equator, such as the one in this movie. But I was irritated the film handles this with some of the same cynicism that tainted the world films, because once again we're back in a world where no one cares about dinosaurs anymore. We're introduced to Jonathan Bailey's Dr. Loomis packing away his dino exhibit because no one is showing up and it's being closed. And if you bet they're going to drop a "When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth" banner as a very overused nod to the famous bit in the original, of course they do. But the dinosaurs that are left are treated as nuisances, like the sad sight of a dying brontosaurus holding up traffic in the middle of New York, just like any other escaped zoo animal. Rupert Friend's Krebs even mutters, "Why can't you die already?" Which is our first indication that he's going to be the bad guy. I don't mind them effectively reverting things, but it's just a bit unnecessarily mean about it when the whole point is to try and take away the bitter taste the last trilogy left. Once past that though, Rebirth is a refreshingly clean slate. Despite the subtitle, it feels quite standalone, so it isn't burdened by too much continuity or trying to set up a new series, it's just trying to tell a new story within this universe. We've done all the legacy sequel stuff with the original cast in the last one, so instead we've got a new setting and a totally new set of characters, mostly relying on some big names. So we have Scarlett Johansson as mercenary Zora, who is largely very pragmatic. She just goes where the money is, does the job, and isn't paid to ask questions. But just because she can compartmentalise her ethics, that doesn't mean the reality of the job isn't catching up with her, as she's still reeling from the recent death of her friend, and it's kept her away from her family. Zora wants out, and she knows this is an illegal mission, but a $10 million payday is enough to sway her, and the idea that ultimately this will save lives. You might even say she's got a lot of red on her ledger that she needs to make up for. What I'm basically saying is that she's pretty much playing a version of Black Widow here. And the fact that she's so focused on her task, maybe even coldly so at times, can make her a bit unlikable at points, so I appreciate the dynamic she has with Mahershala Ali's Kincaid, whose boat they hire for the expedition, and it's obvious that these two go back a long way. I actually quite like the scene where they just talk about how messed up their lives are. He's mourning the death of his child, which adds a bit of depth to their characters and the trust they have for each other. And Ali is a good presence in the early going, but I do think he's a little underutilised once they actually get on the island. He's ostensibly the leader, but it feels like Zora is the one really taking charge, so he kind of falls into the background sometimes and is not given enough moments of his own, at least until close to the end. Instead, I think Jonathan Bailey's Dr. Loomis is probably the most memorable character here. He's clearly mould after Dr. Grant, they even personally mention that he's a student of his, but there's also elements of Ian Malcolm in there as well, even getting a bleak speech about human survival that is directly lifted from the original Crichton book, but was said by Malcolm. And Bailey acquits himself well as a bit of a hot nerd who gets himself surprisingly involved in the action once he's on the island. He's quietly charismatic and likeable, which is good for someone that is clearly meant to be the audience surrogate. He spent a lot of the film trying to protect the dinosaurs, but also reawaken Zora's own repressed morality about their employer. And Rupert Friend is clearly relishing the part of blood-sucking capitalist Krebs. There is a bit of dimension to him. He's not a complete caricature, but he's pretty immoral. Sure, he wants to find a cure to save millions of lives, but mostly because he can make a lot of money from it, especially if he's first, even if that means breaking international law and sacrificing a few people in the process. His true ruthlessness and self-interest comes out when it's his neck on the line. Then his treacherousness reveals itself. And Friend feels especially well cast in this film. He's got the kind of matinee idol looks that would be right at home in a 60s B-movie dinosaur flick. But there's also a bit of a self-aware edge to his mustache-twirling villainy, which means means that he looks like he's having the most fun out of anyone. Admittedly, Rebirth starts a little bit slower out of the blocks than previous World films, which race through to get to the action and dinosaurs, but I appreciate that we got more quiet moments to care about the characters, something that I can't say I ever did about the ones in the last trilogy. But the longer setup is also down to the fact that it has too many characters, as we don't just have the Spec Ops team, we also get the Delgado family, whose boat is capsized by a Mosasaurus because their dad has decided that sailing his family close to a globally restricted dinosaur island is a good idea. They get picked up by the team, but then they get separated again, and the movie effectively has two sets of main characters in parallel plots, both trying to converge on the former research lad to get rescued. This is trying to replicate the dynamic in the original film. You had Malcolm, Ellie and Hammond trying to restore power while Grant and the kids were running around in the park. And the Grant parallels are even more obvious when there's a subplot that Ruben isn't a big fan of boyfriend Xavier, who's a bit of a lazy, pretty boy that at first seems like he might have a future in a dinosaur intestine somewhere, but then he shows moments of bravery and responsibility that eventually earns Ruben's respect. And I didn't mind these characters, but having a second set of protagonists is just too heavy a load, because now we have 8 main characters, and that's not even counting the secondary characters that you know the film is going to whittle down. It's just a matter of how and when. Unsurprisingly, having to juggle between 2 different storylines does cause some pacing problems. But I did like having some distinct characters, as while people love the dinosaurs, we do also remember the characters in Jurassic Park, and I think that says something, because quite a bit of the first half of that film is ethical and scientific debate about bringing dinosaurs back from extinction and commercialising it, but we remember that stuff and quote it, chaos theory and all that, but that's also something they probably couldn't ever do again. Sure, the sequels have continued those themes, but mostly as a way of introducing some new, even deadlier dinosaur. And speaking of which, Rebirth introduces several freakish mutant crossbreeds, things that shouldn't have survived, let alone been made, but life finds a way. Most prominently, we have the bulbous-headed, 6-armed D-Rex. The D stands for Distortus. No, really, that is its name. But the Jurassic Park sequels are largely just romps in the park, just getting characters onto the islands and then ripping them to shreds. And Rebirth especially feels in the tradition of The Lost World and the third film that I've never quite understood the hate for. However, that does also mean there's quite a bit of been there, done that about this, especially because the setup is reminiscent of the films that have followed in Jurassic Park's massive footprints, like Kong's Skull Island, or the pharmaceutical plot point of Anaconda's The Hunt for the Blood Orchid. Yeah, I can't believe I brought that out as a point of comparison for this, but after years of divisive entries, the franchise is playing it safe here. But what elevates the film is new director Gareth Edwards, who is the perfect fit for a movie like this, with his experience on movies like Monsters or the 2014 Godzilla, and it is abundantly clear that he's a massive Spielberg fan because he does his best impression of the legendary director and fills it with homages throughout. And coming from an effects background, he knows how to stage the dinosaur sequences with both a sense of scale, but also wonder, especially in the scene where they meet the Titanosaurus herd, trying to replicate that scene with the Brachiosaurus in the original Jurassic Park. Edwards is even quite liberal with his use of the John Williams theme, because when you have a John Williams theme at your disposal, you should absolutely use it as much as possible. I've sometimes found Edwards' movies like The Creator or Rogue One to be technical and emotionally sterile, but there's a warmth to this because it has that Spielberg spirit. Ironically, for all the stuff about The Creator being shot on FX3s, Rebirth was shot on film to further be a throwback. But there's a wit to how he stages the dinosaur attacks, especially the way you get little peaks of the dinosaurs in the water and smoke in the background right before they attack. Just that little "it's right behind you." And the Spielberg callbacks extend past Jurassic, like Zora attempt to get a sample from the Mosasaurus. There's a fitting tribute to Jaws in its 50th year. It's a really exciting set piece. I'm surprised that Scarlett didn't go full Roy Scheider at the end of it and exclaim, "Smile, you son of a bitch," as she fires off the dart. There's also a subplot where the youngest Delgado, Isabella, is traumatised mute early on, but befriends a cute Aquilatops that helps her out of her shell again. again, that she nicknames Dolores. Not only does Spielberg love a cute, easily merchandisable gremlin, but Isabella lures Dolores using candy in a blatant nod to E.T. Speaking of which, there's some pretty obvious product placement, especially for Mars products, particularly in a surprisingly well-stocked abandoned grocery shop. But this is by far most obvious in the very opening scene where a Snickers wrapper causes the D-Rex to escape, which is pretty amusing when you think about it, because most sponsors don't usually want their brand associated with a lot of people dying, especially a sequence where the person eating the snack ends up as one by the end of it. Also, this is yet another Gareth Edwards movie where people are separated by a blast door and something is coming up to kill them, be it a dinosaur or Darth Vader. Why do you love blast doors, Gareth? This is such a weirdly specific director trademark. But these films are very dependent on their set pieces, and Edwards stages them with the right amount of suspense and horror. The one where they abseil down into the nest is actually really well done until it gets a bit silly and someone survives something that should have very easily killed them. But easily the standout for me is the one taken from Crichton's novel that wasn't adapted previously, involving a sleeping T-Rex and a raft, which is genuinely tense and thrilling and fun in the way that these films should be. I personally found Jurassic World Rebirth to be a bit of a return to form for the series, although I could easily understand being underwhelmed, as this monster mash in the jungle is very well trodden ground by now. But I think the film exemplifies just how badly Trevorrow handled his films, because this is so much closer to the spirit of the earlier movies, and Edwards' direction is far more competent all around as an unabashed Spielberg tribute. Rebirth has fairly modest ambitions, but the bar has been set so low at this point that even a decent, if fairly disposable entry is still a major improvement. Yes, it has the clunky, cheesy dialogue that kept scripts are kind of known for by now, and it's a little long and bloated, but it also delivers a lot of what you come to see a Jurassic film to see, enough that fans should have less to complain about this time. It isn't close to the original because you're never going to match that, and it isn't exactly evolutionary, but at least it isn't a big pile of shit either. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip on my Ko-fi page, or YouTube's Sue Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can give me a raw over on my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and subscribe, it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.